Words about the report, which I think is a really valuable update on and overview of the state of development aid. I co-authored a chapter in the report with Anna Marriott, who is Health Policy Lead for Oxfam, and we were looking at the use of ODA to encourage private investment in the healthcare sector. Disentangling what is reported as ODA in these investments is tricky, so our chapter considers the broader system of loans and equity investments made by bilateral and multilateral finance institutions, development finance institutions. The rationale behind the promotion of private investment in healthcare companies seems to largely come from an interest in job creation. The idea that healthcare companies can be big employers. I can't imagine there's anyone in the room who disagrees with the idea of using ODA to expand access to decent work and fair employment. Job creation is, after all, not just an important part of the economy, but also about the health and well-being of people, the possible benefits of decent work for the physical and mental health of workers. But there is another perspective that needs to be applied to these investments, and that's the effect on inequality. And I'm sorry to say that the current trend does point towards deepening social divisions and poverty. Many of the ventures receiving investment offer expensive healthcare services completely out of reach of the vast majority of populations, let alone the poorest. Boutique clinics, IVF centres, luxury hospital suites, these do not cater to the poorest. They're typically for-profit companies governed by commercial imperatives. We know these pressures to generate revenue lead to unnecessary testing. They lead to unnecessary treatments. Those themselves have negative health impacts, but they also lead to cost inflation across the healthcare sector more broadly. Some of the companies have a base of the pyramid model, based on high throughput services that aim to reduce costs for users, and so they can make claims about affordability. But often these claims of affordability may have little resonance for the poorest, for whom even these relatively low fees are overwhelming. And healthcare user fees, I might remind you, are one of the most common causes of people being forced into poverty and remaining in poverty. They're a deeply regressive form of healthcare financing. I might add, of course, there are concerns with the way in which many of these investments are channeled through tax havens. There are many lessons to be learned from what unfolded at private equity giant Abraj, but one of the key questions for me is why its much vaunted billion-dollar growth markets health fund seemed to be based in the Cayman Islands. I don't need to tell you that the circumvention of national taxation system does little to support the redistribution needed for inclusive development. And what does the segregation of users into 2- and 3-tiered systems, healthcare systems, mean for social equality? What does it mean to have the poorest confined to under-resourced government systems, while the middle classes use affordable private services and the wealthy can access high-end chains or travel abroad? This not only leads to social segregation, it also undermines the redistribution of resources needed to achieve universal health coverage. Universal health coverage needs that redistribution of resources from the wealthiest to fund the healthcare for the poorest. And segregation is liable to exacerbate and not reduce inequalities. The worrying thing for Anna and myself was that these concerns rarely appear in discussions around private investment in the healthcare sector, at least not the ones that we can see publicly. And I hope maybe someone will correct me on that after this. The narrow focus on job creation, on growth, all tends to overlook the divisive and inequitable healthcare systems being created. It tends to overlook the potential diversion of publicly trained healthcare workers into the high-end chains. It tends to overlook the fee-based models that push people into poverty. There are exceptions, of course. The UK CDC group produced a framework for analysing health investments that includes a dimension on access and affordability, that includes measures on the proportion of patients who are poor using a company. And that's promising, but it remains to be seen how it's going to be used. Similarly, the World Bank has its anticipated impact measurement and monitoring system, although at the time of writing our chapter it wasn't clear whether and how that would be used to monitor effects on health, poverty and inequality. There's also tentative progress in terms of transparency, and it's reassuring to see much clearer online reporting by DFIs when it comes to their healthcare investments. It's a lot easier for me to find details about investments on the website. So we're seeing slow improvements, but we need more. Anna and I concluded the chapter by making a call for the development community to address these equity and systemic concerns. The private investment path we're seeing unfold before us still looks worryingly inequitable and is unlikely to bring about a sustainable development that leaves no one behind. We use the chapter to call for a pause on investments in healthcare unless and until development organisations review the pro-poor effects of their healthcare investments and introduce decision-making frameworks to ensure that investments always benefit rather than exclude the poor. ODA should not be squandered on exclusionary and inequitable projects. I hope the OECD and other organisations represented in the room can take forward some of these concerns and the other strong messages emerging from the report.